Welcome back. A new report from the UN Environment says there is a growing momentum in global efforts to address plastic pollution. The report, first of its kind, finds governments are increasing the pace of implementation and the scope of action to curb the use of single-use plastics. Well, under the theme Beat Plastic Pollution, World Environment Day 2018 is issuing a call to action to individuals, governments, the public and the private sector to examine joint solutions to reduce the heavy burden of plastic pollution on our natural places, wildlife and our own health. Well, the World Environment Day is the single largest celebration of our environment each year. Since it began in 1974, it has grown to become a global platform for public outreach that is widely celebrated across the globe.
Is essential for a prosperous and peaceful future. We all have a role to play in protecting our only home. But it can be difficult to know what to do or where to start, and that is why this World Environment Day has just one request: beat plastic pollution. Our world is swamped by harmful plastic waste. Every year, more than 8 million tons end up in the oceans. Microplastics in the seas now outnumber stars in our galaxy. From remote islands to the Arctic, nowhere is untouched. If present trends continue, by 2050, our oceans will have more plastic than fish. On World Environment Day, the message is simple: reject single-use plastic. Refuse what you can't reuse. Together we can chart a path to a cleaner, greener world.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres there. Well, joining us now is an environmental researcher and a lecturer at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, Durban, South Africa, Dr. Olatunde Olatunji. Thank you for joining us on the program. If I might go ahead, as we focus on beating plastic pollution on this World Environment Day, how can Africa improve environmental conditions on the continent? Hopefully we'll try to reconnect with him. In the meantime, a top United Nations aid coordinator has supported major powers stepping up sanctions on South Sudanese leaders with possible asset freezes and travel bans. Mark Lowcock, UN emergency relief coordinator, says sanctions should target military formations and the men with guns. The UN Security Council voted last Thursday to renew some sanctions on South Sudan through mid-July and to consider imposing the bans on 6 South Sudanese leaders if the country's conflict does not stop by the end of June.
I think measures which bear more directly on the economic and other interests of the people in control of the military formations and the men with guns is an important space to look at. There's lots of concerns about how various parties in the conflict are enriching themselves through South Sudan's oil and gold and teak and its other natural resources, and lots of concern that a lot of South Sudan's wealth is being held outside the country. There have been declarations of cessation of hostilities, but they're a fiction because the fighting continues. The economy's collapsed. Belligerents are using scorched earth tactics, murder and rape as weapons of war. They're all gross violations of international law, and 7 million people now in South Sudan need humanitarian assistance this year. That's most of the people in the country. South Sudan is the world's most dangerous place to be an aid worker, and 100 aid workers have lost their lives since the conflict began, and that's there are crimes being committed against aid workers with apparent impunity, and there needs to be accountability for this. And the government, because it's the government, and this is a responsibility of governments everywhere, have the prime responsibility for that.
In East Africa, Rwandan pastors say the government's decision to close thousands of churches and hundreds of mosques in the country violates freedom of worship and expression. Well, the government says it took the decision in a bid to bring order to religious institutions, many of which have failed to comply with building regulations and noise pollution.
Rwandan authorities say the move to tighten rules on registration of churches is aimed at stemming fraud. Since the beginning of the year, the government has shut thousands of churches and around 100 mosques, saying that these religious centers fail to comply with building regulations and noise pollution standards. Despite concern over the widespread closures, founder of Patmos Churches, John Bosco Nsabimana, says the move will provide more transparency.
The closure of the churches didn't stop our collaboration with the government. We recognize that they were a little forceful in the closures of churches, but on the other hand, it has also forced churches to comply and ensure that they build adequate structures, which is also something that is good for the country and gives the country a good look.
With a congregation of about 2,000 people, Patmos Church is among a few churches in Kigali that were not closed in a recent government clampdown on illegal places of worship. Meanwhile, Rwanda's government also accuses some preachers of taking advantage of vulnerable people to grow rich. Before the current shutdown of places of worship, Rwanda's government earlier this year banned mosques in the capital from using loudspeakers during the call to prayer. Shaswari Nshimiyimana, Rwanda's Islamic Association Vice Mufti, says the conditions by government on mosques is harsh.
I think it is better now for our authority to think and to see whether they can facilitate us and use our mosque without putting very hard conditions.
The crackdown also coincides with a review of a law regulating the operations of faith-based organizations. According to the proposed new law, all preachers must have theological training before starting a church, and religious communities are expected to meet standards in terms of infrastructure, safety, and hygiene.
Let's take you to Libya, where amateur football teams faced off on the coastal city of Misrata in an annual Ramadan football tournament, one of many such competitions held across Libyan cities throughout the fasting month. Well, each district in each city has its own tournament where teams compete in several rounds, with the winners qualifying for the final. As sunset approaches on Misrata's outdoor football fields, players entertain spectators with matches of five-a-side football held annually in the Islamic fasting month of Ramadan. Adults and children in the Libyan coastal city spend the last few hours of fasting in heated games as they compete in the annual tournament. The tournament is not only held in Misrata, but across the country, including Benghazi in the east and the capital, Tripoli.
We like to encourage the youth to compete in tournaments generally, but these tournaments held during fasting hours bring about serenity and also gives an opportunity for the guys to meet and get to know each other. Football unites us more than anything else.
Libyans have for years suffered from a civil war and factional fighting that have splintered the country following the 2011 NATO-backed revolt that toppled Muammar Gaddafi. Participants and organizers of the tournament say that, if for nothing else, football brings Libyans together, creating lasting friendships.
It has now become a tradition to organize these tournaments and meetings to bring youth together in a Ramadan gathering on the tables of the football field. God willing, we will organize this each Ramadan so we can unite adults and children. Our goal being sports unites us. Ramadan unites us on the tables of football.
For spectator Fatih Al-Darab, it has become a habit to expect this tournament every year. And that's Network Africa at this time. Many thanks for watching. I'm Millicent Walker.